this is Warren. Welcome to my home studio. And today we're going to have a look at my live setup. And basically, what I've got on the pedal board is a Line 6 HX Stomp. And along with that, I've combined a few analog pedals that I've been using for years. That's all on a Pedal Train Junior board. It's powered by a True Tone CS12. And we've also got a couple of other pedals, the Tuner, which is a Strobo Stomp HD. And there is a Dunlop X Mini expression pedal. And the analog pedals are being controlled by the Boss ES5 switcher, and that is also controlling the HX Stomp via MIDI. So what I'm using this board for right now in this particular application is the main outs would go to the front of house, to the PA, and there's also a separate send that goes to an amp. Now what I've been using for the last few gigs is this Line 6 Spider Valve, and it consists of a digital front end, but it's also got a Bogner designed power amp. So I'm not really using the front end on that because I think the modeling on the HX is much more updated than that. That's kind of like an old model. And the Bogner power amp actually sounds great, and you can use it by the effects return at the back of the amp. So all I'm using that amp for is basically a powered 1x12. It's got a Celestine Vintage 30 in it. So let's have a look at HX Edit on the screen, and I'll show you what I'm doing on the HX Stomp. So here we are in the HX Edit software, and let's go through what we've got here. The first couple of slots are 2 amp slots. I've got a US double vib, which is a Fender twin reverb vibrato channel. And there's also a Soldano crunch channel, which is Soldano lead crunch. That's the model we've got here. There is a volume block. There is a tremolo block, delay, reverb. And there's a split here, and one side is the IR, which goes to the main outputs, which would then go to the front of house. And there's also a split. So without the IR, it just goes into this EQ, and that goes into the effects return of a Line 6 Spider Valve. So the front end of that Spider Valve is bypassed when you go into the return, and you're just using it as a power amp. So clean power amp and a Celestine Vintage 30 speaker. So I'll go through the models one by one. I'll talk a little bit about how I've got them set, and we'll listen to a few sounds as well. The first one is this US double vib, which is the Fender Twin, like I said, and I've got the drive set to around 4.5. That seems to be a bit of a sweet point on these amps. You can get a little bit of grit out of it, but largely it's a pretty clean sound. The bass I've got set to around 4. That's normally where I would run it on a twin. The mid I had to turn up to around 8.5 to get the right mid-range that I wanted. The treble is around 6.5. That's kind of where I would have it set on the amp. The twin doesn't really have a presence. They've added 1 year, so that is set to 2.5. Just set that by year. This channel volume and master volume is interesting. Now, the master volume is if the amp did have a master between the preamp and the power amp, that's where it would go. The twin doesn't have one, so we're going to set that to 10. The channel volume is around 6, so that is set there to match the overall volume of this particular model with the Soldano. Generally, these sag, hum, ripple, bias controls I don't really touch. In this case, I wanted a little less sag, a little more boldness, so I dropped it to around 4. So let's have a listen to what it sounds like. With the guitar volume full up, this is what you get. Now, when you turn the guitar volume down, especially on a Strat, it'll darken up ever so slightly, and I love what happens when you do that. Now, unfortunately, when you turn the guitar volume down too far, it starts disappearing. So to fix that, what I do have in line is a booster. Now, this is something made by my friend Stefan at Big Noise Pedals. It's a custom pedal that he's made for me. What it is a Roger Mayer Voodoo 1 pedal, and he's added bass and middle controls to it. And he's also added a selectable mid frequency. So you can select which mid frequency you're boosting, and the bass control works as a cut. So normally I find the Voodoo ones at certain applications, especially into a clean amp, may have a little too much bass, which makes it slightly farty. So when you take that out, it does make it a lot more tighter in the low end. So without the pedal added in, this is what we're getting. And with the pedal on, you get a little bit of a volume boost and also a slight amount more grit as well. So if you then turn the guitar volume down, it cleans up beautifully. And in this case, it's not making it too dark. You still have plenty of definition. It does sound a little warmer than, having your guitar volume on 10, but in this case, there's plenty of chime and spank and clarity. So around 8 on the volume is generally where I would have it. And then I'm obviously riding it, but generally for most of the time, it's around that amount of volume on the guitar. So if you look at the middle and the bridge pickup, if you look at the middle pickup, if you look at neck and middle, and the bridge pickup by itself, you get a little bit of that crunch happening because it's the humbucker that I'm using here. So that's pretty much my clean and slightly dirty sounds that I would use. So for the crunch and dirty sounds, what I've got is the Soldano module on now. So if we just look at that, the drive is around 5.5. Normally on the real amp, it's a little bit higher, but in this case, there was plenty at 5.5. The bass is set to around 6.3. That's kind of roughly where I would have it on the amp, maybe a little less. Mid seems about right, 6.6 here. The treble is around 5.4. I normally have it right in the middle on the amp. Presence is around 5. Channel volume is around 5.5. Now the master here is around 6, because if you push it past 6 on the Soldano, it starts getting like really big and flubby. At this point, you have the right balance of fullness and clarity before it gets too mushy. And sag, hum, ripple, etc. I've left them exactly where they are. So by itself, this is what it sounds like. And then what I do is to put the Maxon SD9 on, and it's got the level all the way full and the drive around, say, 11 o'clock. And it's acting as a booster with a little bit of crunch on it itself. So that's when you would get a slightly higher gain sound. So without, with, so then you kind of get a slightly singing lead sound. And then when you back off the guitar volume, you get this. I also have the AC booster. Now this is a little tighter than the Maxon SD9, especially I've added a mod that makes it even tighter than you would normally have it. It also boosts the mids as well, which makes it slightly more vocal. And now this is with the big noise slide return in front. Now the good thing about this is when you drop your guitar volume to around, say, 3 or 4, you get this lovely clean sound. On middle and bridge, you get this nice spanky thing. And you can clean it up all the way by taking the guitar volume down to around 3. The next thing we're going to look at is this IR block. Now I am running it in stereo, so I'm using the dual IR slots, and this is an IR that I made myself. So let's have a look at this IR block. I'm using it in dual settings, so it remains in stereo, and it's the same IR in both sides, that I'm not putting anything different. The only reason I'm using it in dual mode is that the signal stays in stereo. So this particular IR you can download with the patch as well, and just make sure it's loaded in here into the slot number 1, because if it's any other slot, it isn't going to read as well. So this thing has to be panned left and right with the pan A and pan B settings, otherwise it collapses to mono. So the IR is only going to the main outputs and not going to the spider valve, which is then split before the IR, and it goes only to this EQ in case I need to tune the EQ on the amp. Generally not really needed. It's more of a, in case it's needed, it's loaded into the patch. So what you can do is you can pretty much run this into the effects return of any amp. And the reason I do this, I find it's really useful for me, especially because I've grown up playing amps on stage. And the moment you run direct without the amp being there, it sounds a little, and it feels, most importantly, it feels very weird to me. So I like having the amp, even if it's not too loud, just having a little bit of that, amp sound on stage. Even with the IRs, I find it helps me. To me, it sounds like the guitar will sustain a little bit more with, you don't have to crank the gain to get that same amount of sustain. Because I think that amp moving air, it kind of maybe reacting with the guitar in a way. So I kind of make sure as far as possible the amp is there. And you can use the effects return of any tube amp if it's got an effects loop. Just go into the effects return. So you're bypassing the front preamp and you're only using the power section of the amp. Let's have a look at the reverb setting. It's on a plate and the decay is right in the middle at 5. There's a bit of pre-delay which gives it a bit more clarity because it separates the dry signal from the wet reverb signal. So I've added around 80 milliseconds of pre-delay. I've got a low cut at around 90 just to clean up the low end on the reverb signal itself, and the high cut is around 2.5. I just did it by ear. Anything like way past that, it starts sounding like the reverb itself is too bright. Now, generally, one rule of thumb with setting this is if you've got a dark guitar sound, you would use a brighter reverb and vice versa. So in my case, it sounded right around this 2.5 kilohertz setting. The mix is set to 28%, at least I did that by ear. If you need more, just turn it up. Let's have a look at the delay now. I've got the mix and level assigned to an expression pedal. I'm always writing the amount of delay in real time, so it's kind of useful having that on an expression. And I find as I increase the mix, it's good to increase the level a wee bit, just like around less than a dB or so. But it just kind of prevents it from, getting washed away as you turn up the mix. The note sync here, I've set it to a quarter note, and the feedback is around 45%. Now there's a function here called the scale, which basically lets you set the right to a fraction of the left. So in this case, 75% would then make the right a dotted eighth note. So you've got a quarter left, dotted eighth right. To me, the bit depth sounds best on 24, and the sample rate I've set at 12 kilohertz. Now the sample rate is quite cool. You can make the delay more or less hi-fi or lo-fi. I set it around this, but if you want it really grungy and lo-fi, you can turn this down to around 8 kilohertz. To me, it sounds good at this 12 setting, but feel free to experiment. So without the delay, this is what it sounds like. And with it, so you can get like really washy with it. I think the most I've got it goes to around 36%. And it's really useful having that on an expression pedal. There's also this tremolo, pretty self-explanatory, but I've got it set on a 1/8 triplet. The intensity is around 7.2. I just backed that off till it felt good. Wave shape, I've left it at sine. Duty cycle, I backed off to around 40. It sounded a little nicer that way. And I've got a level boost here on the tremolo itself. It's 1.2 dB just because when you put the tremolo on, it tends to disappear. So then once you have a little bit of that level boost factored in, it seems to even out that sound. Okay, so let's go through a few sounds that I've got dialed on the pedal board. The first one is the slight return into the Fender Twin. And this is generally the clean sound that I'd use most of the time. Back off the guitar volume if I want it really clean. And if I want it slightly grittier, I turn up the volume to around 9. Now the cool thing about the ES5 is each preset switch, if you hit it again, it's got a secondary function. So in this case, I would switch the amps from the Twin to the Soldano and keep the slight return on. And now when I turn the guitar volume down to say around 5 or 6, you get this lovely clean sound. Very Hendrixy in a way. The next one is a slight return with the Arion chorus going into the Fender Twin. And when I hit that secondary function, it puts the chorus off and it puts the drivable vibe machine on. Then we've got the AC booster going into the Soldano. It's pretty nice and tight on the low end, that's why I like the AC booster for that. And then you've got the Maxon SD9 into the Soldano. And that's pretty much my lead sound most of the time. It does clean up really nicely, especially on the single coils. So it's pretty nice just getting, a variety of sounds from that one sound and just doing everything from the guitar. The next patch is pretty much the same thing, the Maxon into the Soldano, but now I've got the drivable vibe machine on as well, and this is what it sounds like. And if you back the guitar volume off, it's pretty much the Ode to a Sunny Day lead sound. The secondary function puts on the chorus and switches off the vibe. Here's the AC booster into the Fender Twin. And here's the Maxon into the Fender Twin. It's an alternate drive sound when I don't really want it as crunchy as the Soldano. I hope you had fun watching this video. You can download the preset and the IR from the link I've provided in the description, and feel free to just play around with it. Use it as a starting point. Don't think it's like, the be all and end all of tone tweaking or anything, nothing like that. It's just something that I happen to have dialed right now, and I thought I would share that with you. If you do like the video, please like and subscribe. Leave me a message in the comments. Let me know what you think. And in case you have any queries, you can ask as well, and I'll do my best to answer. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.